Welcome everyone to the Co-Creators Convergence, Convergence, Unity and Peace. We are really thrilled to have Laurie Timmermann back with us. She's bringing us a wonderful discussion for the last couple days and will continue to do so. So let me tell you a little bit about Laurie. Laurie Timmermann is a global development specialist and visionary thinker with over 28 years of experience focusing on global issues of sustainable development, agriculture, food systems, energy, environment, climate change, women's empowerment, democratization, and community bill of rights. Demilitarization, and she is, and this is one of the ways I met her, world beyond war peace advocacy. In the 1990s, she was part of the Center for Visionary Leadership, WorldServe, and Network of Light Communities in Washington, D.C. Since 2014, she has been on a knowledge quest regarding themes of awakening and disclosure and enjoying related conferences and research. So we're going to learn more about the peace dividend, funding food, water, health, education, and livelihoods for all. So with that, Laurie, welcome. Thank you so much.
Okay, well, good evening, everyone. And so glad to be doing this with Noel Bob, Co-Creators Convergence. The topic that I'm going to share tonight is actually the topic of my career. So I did 2 international degrees, master's in political and economic development, and then spent a career in Washington, D.C., working at multilateral finance institutions and 3 years overseas in Africa, as well as several nonprofit headquarters offices. So I live now here in Asheville, North Carolina, and what I realized was that the story of the U.S. International Development Assistance is a story that's not widely told, that it's kind of almost like a news blackout. And it is kind of the space where it's the good news. It's like where we, through USAID and other international programs, we fund the real development on the ground to move the needle, to meet basic human needs. And this is across the spectrum, whether it's food, health, water, the judiciary, rule of law. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take folks on a tour of this development assistance field, because once we have our peace dividend, once we wrest the treasury, the funds away from the war-making the military industrial complex, we then can use the peace dividend for positive human sustainable development. So what I'll do right now is I'll start with screen sharing. So this title of my talk is Understanding Sustainable International Development and Funding. So we're faced with converging challenges where we both have peak oil. We're on the backside of peak oil. Peak oil will become more expensive, and the climate change issue. So we have to keep a lot of that oil in the ground and not drill it and not use it. So here is our challenges on the development front. Regarding climate change, we've got increasing frequency, intensity of storms, hurricanes, tornadoes, natural disasters, flooding, landslides, droughts, crop losses, food insecurity. My field was in rural livelihoods, working with small farmers, and this is a very challenging environment for farmers over the world. we're experiencing water shortages. When I was in 4 different African countries, I saw that they have a rainy season every year, and it was being compressed. The rainy seasons are starting later, they're ending earlier. The nights and there's warmer summers and warmer nights, longer heat waves. There's desertification, and in mountains, less snowpack. So what that means is there's a longer frost-free growing period, a longer season to grow crops. However, this warm weather does not kill off the insect pests. So you get outbreaks of pests. We're faced with a number of environmental impacts like species extinction, die-off, plankton decline, ocean acidification, sea ice melt, shrinking glaciers, rising oceans, wildfires, and then the plants have to shift to different ranges. So what I'm going to be covering here is 4 different topics. One is the overall umbrella topic of the official development assistance. And then within that, at a nation state level, we have the developed countries, US, Europe, and Japan have bilateral international aid agencies where they use taxpayer funds for development assistance. Number 3 is the multilateral agencies and development banks. And 4, then I'm going to share one of the projects that I worked on as a good practice approach. So let's take a look at this graph here. It's called the champagne or the champagne glass. And we see that way because the upper part is the richest 20% of the world's population. So that represents 81.2% of the world's income goes to the top 20%. So we can see here the vast income inequalities. And this is what really struck me when I was a teen exchange student to Brazil, just that exposure of that all the world does not live like the developed world, and that stark contrast. So this graph is showing over 8 years, all of these donor partners from the developed world, the amount of assistance that aggregates up to a total. So we're looking at, it looks like right around 130%. I mean, $130 billion. So the next category are the bilateral aid agencies, and these are the national government, international development and relief aid agencies that directly, in a 2-way agreement, provide aid to specific countries. So the backdrop here gives the logos of some of these, and you can see CEDA, DANITA, NORAD, UK aid. So we'll start with the US aid agency, USAID, Agency for International Development. The left-hand side of our screen has the list of the sector areas in which aid is provided. So I'll just read those out: agriculture and food security, democracy and human rights and governance, economic growth and trade, education, environment and global climate change, gender equality and women's empowerment, global health, water and sanitation, working in crisis and conflict. And so that one is what I referred to is, the overlap with the peace community, that when there is a coup or conflict or some natural disaster, within the development assistance, there is a whole relief sector. And then they have something called US Global Development Lab. But over here on the right side of my, oops, didn't want to do that. Okay. So, so for fiscal year 2019, the total budget for USAID was, just about at 20 billion. 1.37 billion is to administer those funds, which we'll talk about in terms of the project cycle. And then adding State Department to it, that's a total of right around $40 billion. Well, these too much, our diplomacy of, reaching out a helping hand and, reaching out with diplomacy is 40 billion as compared to 693 billion for the Department of Defense. So there's a lot of room here for shifting our prioritization in our international relations of making friendship by cooperation. Oh, I just wanted to add, that $693 does not include the intelligence agencies. That's an extra $81 billion. So these funds are very carefully programmed. You have USAID offices operating in many countries overseas, as within the embassies, and these are charged with looking at a country's situation, and out of all of the potential needs or benefits that could be given, then the USAID mission does a strategic planning exercise and says, we are going to fund in these 5 areas. So, so this is a little bit of this this program cycle. So at the top of the circle, you have what I just said, this strategic planning exercise. That gets detailed into a project design and implementation where your sector specialists come in, specific activity design. So what USAID does, it doesn't really implement projects itself. It has the idea of what it wants done in the country. It creates a request for proposal, and it creates a bid. The nonprofit companies have these proposal units, and there's a very precise art to this proposal grant writing to respond to USAID and to try to draft the winning proposal. So this activity design and implementation, that is kind of referring to the NGOs who are responding, or there is a grant program, a grant funding mechanism for contracts. So there are for-profit firms as well that usually go after the contracts. And then, as you go, you're supposed to monitor against the indicators of what you said you're going to do. There's a whole monitoring evaluation part of the project. So here I wanted to just start with a little bit of my own personal history and background. Just out of grad school, one of my very first jobs was to go to Mali and to design, write a proposal for the second phase of a USAID Mali Rural's Women's Training Center. And so I got to tour and see the women, the villages, assess what their needs were for a second phase of this project. And this trained in village health workers, village gardening experts, literacy, and then safe midwifery practice, which has progressed beyond that because now they do not recommend birth at home. They have birthing centers. But I was introduced to the karité nut, if you know what that is, the Shia nut. and that's in a lot of cosmetic products. But I physically saw the women do very laborious hand labor processes to process the shea nut. And so this was my first introduction to something called appropriate technology. Here's a device. It's like a converted truck jack, and maybe it produces 4 times as much processed karité as this manual process. So this kind of began my love with appropriate technology, of designing for the other 90%. So, and another personal project I was involved with, and this is much more recently, but it's still, again, it's with Africare. Both are with Africare. And this project, I was a agriculture program manager, and Africare had a suite of something called the Food for Peace projects. And this Food for Africare had, I had been in Mali in 1985, and Africare continuously was working with the villages in the Timbuktu region, specifically with irrigation from the Niger River and irrigated agriculture. Well, during the year that I was backstopping this project, Libya, there was upheaval in Libya, and these Tuareg soldiers returned back to Mali with all of this weaponry. And throughout the history, even recently, there have been attempts for the Tuareg rebels to occupy this country and take it over from the country of Mali. Well, this is what they did. So all of those red places that you see are places that were taken over by the Tuareg rebels, who were then infiltrated by something called Al-Qaeda of the Maghreb. Well, the reason I'm sharing this particular photo and experience is, I watched, over months, the day-by-day occupation of this area. And yes, the rebels were eventually driven out by the French in Operation Serval, but it's like the training that Africare had done among these growers for this irrigated rice, irrigated wheat. They mounted their own effort to go from Timbuktu down to Mopti. They obtained the fuel, they obtained their seeds, and they grew crops under occupation. So this was the level of sophistication of working the producer groups, the Federation of Producers. So I'm sharing this as why we need international aid, because rebels caused people to flee in all of the surrounding countries here into Burkina Faso in the north. And so there is another program called Office of Development Assistance, which has very fast-acting, grant proposals to meet urgent disaster assistance needs. Okay, so in addition to USAID, there's another U.S. international aid assistance program, but it's rather than this traditional aid of project-based. This Millennium Challenge Corporation, created under the Bush administration, 2004, it offers a real large chunk of money. So it's a little bit like vying for or competing with World Bank type of funding. So the MCC creates a compact with a country. These are, hundreds of millions of dollars. The country designs what it wants to do with these money and these funds. However, it's like a little bit of a carrot to be eligible for these programs. They have to have good governance. They have to have good accountability against corruption. And so this money is country-led and it's country implemented. and it focuses on results. So there's a number of actors in the field that are nonprofits or in the civil society sector that are very important, because in order to have this money for USAID to be able to program, you have to have the buy-in from the American people. So with that, this group, Bread for the World, reaches out to the Christian faith community who already have that ethic of, helping the least of these, fighting hunger, fighting poverty, and it, educates its audience, its membership, and then does all these advocacy actions to keep that funding flowing to developing countries. Another one of these that's very, very effective, and I was involved with it early on, right when I hit Washington, D.C., a lay person just said, I want to, was even a musician, I want to impact hunger. And he said that the techniques are there, the money's there, it's just we don't have the will, the political will. So he created this volunteer organization to train citizen activists and how to engage in advocacy, how to talk and work with their elected officials. And so this group has been doing this for 35 years. And, almost, I would say a good part, like 80% of the congressional districts are covered by these results teams. And so instead of each team doing what it wants to do, there's a technical team saying, here is the pivot point, here's the leverage point, and they all act in unison. So acting in unison and forming their congressmen has led to a lot of results. And I did write an article about that. So here's the issues that results engages with. And this, I think this is really impressive in terms of, an impact that, an initiative can do, this microcredit. Very early on in the 80s, this founder, Sam Daly Harris, discovered the Grameen Bank, discovered microcredit. And it's like banking for the poorest, banking at $50, $100, very, very small amounts. And this was in Bangladesh. So both Bangladesh and Results got founded at the same time. And today, the Grameen Bank is active in most of Bangladesh, serving and targeting the poorest women in Bangladesh. So they also work on the health issues, on maternal child health, malaria, HIV, TB, and nutrition, on global education, and here is this work on the global poverty appropriations. The Results is a very high-powered conference every year, very high energy, because they are relying on inspiration. But because they work on the global poverty appropriations, when Results calls, they can get any speaker they want. And I can attest that their technical, their knowledge base that they train their volunteers in is very high quality. And they added, a little bit later on, they added a whole US poverty focus as well. So this is a new organization on the block, a new group that is a very internet, and platform based. So this global citizen group has an online platform, and it has all of its technical sectors. And so you can just, it's a little bit, targeting the millennials. And you can go there and you can learn the up-to-date information across this range of global issues. But then they have another page on their site where they boil that down to, like, if you want to participate, then they have, places where you can do a petition, you can contribute a little bit. So this is a place to watch. And here's one reason to watch it. Aren't we surrounded by really, very discouraging news? This is a good news place, so if this is news that should be on the nightly news, and it would give a different perspective of good versus discouraging news. I belonged to the Society for International Development. This society was created to, that recognize that international development was a sector of itself. So it's for the professionals and for the active nonprofits and for the contractors. So this group, when I hit DC, I went to this group and they had thematic chapters, and so you would have panel sessions. And it's kind of here I really learned a lot about women in development, about patriarchy, about how in all the different cultures, whether it was Islam or Asia or China or Africa or Latin America, there was one specific thematic chapter for women in development, which is a cause near and dear to my heart. So now, interaction is very important in the development field. It's based in DC. And so it's the umbrella association over the top nonprofits, and only nonprofits can be part of that. So there's at least 180 nonprofits. They have to pay for this service. It's a service that advocates their causes with Congress. They meet thematically in their respective areas of intervention. So that's a group I went to quite a bit when I was in Washington, D.C. So yeah, here's their 3 areas they work in: strengthening global development policies and programs, humanitarian policy. So again, development assistance is kind of divided into 2 areas. One is development for stable situations, and then humanitarian policy is for a natural disaster or some kind of conflict situation, and then of course the policy and advocacy with Congress. So you can imagine my surprise and dismay on August 7th of last year when I was I was on a vacation with my family on the Oregon coast, and this notice comes in the news cycle where it says, the U.S. orders freeze of foreign aid bypassing Congress. And it was like there's a cycle for the congressional funding cycle, and there's division between the different arms of government. So there's a Ways and Means in the House side, and they hammer out a budget, and when they do the budget, that budget is law. So to have somebody in the Trump administration ordering USAID to freeze the remaining money, it's like, wait a second, that money it's been programmed, there's contracts, and this created a huge fear and almost like a constitutional crisis. And the Congress leadership had very strongly worded messages to the Trump administration. And by the August 22nd, they had to back down. But that just shows you how vulnerable this sentiment of we're the richest country, we can afford to, we can, instead of basically saying we're going to only treat, we're going to only have relations with countries at the barrel of a gun with our military. It's like, this is the place that really creates peace, is the friendship, cooperation, and meeting basic human needs. So just to give a picture of just how many players there are in this field, We have the European Union, has Europe Aid. This is one of 4 pages, so I'll just pick out the top aid agencies here. Yeah, the Belgium. So yeah, Denmark, it's called Danida. Finland is Finida. France is French Development Agency. Germany is KfW and GIZ. Next page. Okay, what have we got? Norway, so NORAD. Sweden, SIDA. The Swiss Agency for Development Cooperation, SDC. In the UK, DFID. And so in America, Canada is CIDA, C-I-D-A. New Zealand is NZAID. Japan is JICA or GIC. So those are the main, or some of the main ones. And even aid agencies funded from the Middle East. Okay, so in the topic number 3, it's turning over to the multilateral agencies. And these are institutions that lend directly to governments. The significance of that is if we look around America, we have, you know, different levels of government, federal level, state level, but we have these cities, we have city municipalities, things that we need to do as a collective in a society. We can raise the money for it. We have a tax base, but the definition in developing countries is they're capital poor. So to a mass amount of money to do some large financial project kind of is the role of these what are called multilateral financial agencies and development banks. So this whole international community, this whole international sector is guided by something called the Sustainable Development Goals. And there was an original set of development goals that went for 15 years. So I don't want to say year 2000 to 2015, and there was really good progress on a large part of those original goals. So a very inclusive process happened to develop these 17 goals. Oops. So again, in Europe, you know, being they're so close to other countries, and they would know all of these international agencies, international UN agencies, but I wonder and doubt how many just average Americans would. The ones that I specialize in the field of agriculture development, small farmer development, food security, food aid, that kind of thing. So the agencies that I would refer to or were Food and Agriculture Organization, International Fund for Agriculture Development. But you can see that these kind of cover the, you know, the different sectors. The World Bank Group is a UN agency. It's not a private bank. It's and I can share a little bit about that in just a second. Okay. Okay, again, here's the list off of the development banks: African Development Bank, Asian Development Bank, European, Inter-American Development Bank, the World Bank Group. So 2 of these, the Inter-American Development Bank and the World Bank Group, are both located in Washington, D.C. World Bank was the 3rd largest employer. somebody told me that all of the World Bank staff are working from home during this time. So here's the kind of resource flows that these large banks can provide to impact global issues, situations at the global level. So a major issue is climate, changing for climate mitigation, climate adaptation. And so 6 banks together pooled, $28 billion. So that's, and then it shows us how it broke down. They funded agriculture, ecological projects, infrastructure and flood protection, energy, and the most common mitigation project was renewable energy. Okay, so let's look at the World Bank here. World Bank was established after World War II to support the reconstruction of Europe. Today, its mission is to reduce extreme poverty and boost shared prosperity. The World Bank Group provides loans and grants and technical assistance to countries in the private sector to reduce poverty and promote development. And there are 188 member countries. It has 3 financial institutions under that umbrella. So IBRD does the loans for like the middle income countries. International Development Association does loans for the poorest countries, and International Finance Corporation does loans for private sector projects. So here's the scope of what the financial resources provided by the bank, $42.1 billion. And this is programmed in, first they have regional departments, and within the regional departments, they're broken up into sector departments, ag, fishing, forestry, health. You can see all of these. But so I worked there for 5 years in the mid-90s, and you can mention the World Bank Group, and there's come up with some negative criticisms, but I saw really good projects being funded there. I saw people with saying the bank is like this, it needs to be that, like this, moving the needle. I saw people who reformed the bank in significant ways, that it's not resistant to reform. It was called into question for, with that much money, then that's a lot of vendors, it's a lot of possibility for bribery or corruption in the projects. There is oversight by Congress, and one of the senators kind of made sure that all of these banks take to task any any corruption, and they've funded a vice presidency for transparency. So we can talk more about that. Okay, I'm going to unmute everyone if I can. I'm the host and only I can unmute. And I'm new to I'm new to Google. I'm new to Zoom, sorry. Okay, I'm asking you folks to unmute.
Okay, is that working?
Yeah, you're unmuted. I thought we could open up to a little bit of questions and answers.
We got 2 that are still trying to unmute. Hold on a sec. Oh, there we go. There's one. Let's see. There you go. All right. That was quite an overwhelming list that you provided of the of all the agencies, the bilateral aid agencies, the multilateral agencies and development banks, the United Nations agencies.
Is there a question?
Well,
Well, so to just jump in right there, when you go to developing country, all of these UN agencies have offices in the developing countries. The UN, the development nonprofits from all over the world that have grant funding have offices. So there is quite a in the capital cities especially, these agencies are represented. Let's see. So that first was a very macro level. So this is going to go into a little bit of one specific project, micro irrigation in Asia. And this is regarding micro irrigation. This is something called appropriate technology, low-cost technology for the poorest that increases their well-being and their livelihoods. So this is a treadle pump in Asia. You could get it for $35. A rope and water washer pump, solar and wind pumps, micro diesel pumps. And the significance of this for an entry point for development for rural sector is that when you are able to control your water on your crops, then you don't have a drought. You can maybe do crops that are more revenue producing. So this is a company I worked with from 2007. IDE is a company I worked with from 2007 to 2009. Its companion NGO that did the same thing in the same space is called Kickstart, that also produced micro irrigation equipment. So here's a photo of something called the treadle pump, and you could call it the Stairmaster. So you have hoses going into it and out of it, and that pressure flow of the treadling is what makes the water flow. So IDE was founded in '85, and it identified this intervention. It was this what you want of micro irrigation technologies, and it does it all on a enterprise basis, all on the even if the farmers are poor, they have to buy this, or they have to buy it on credit. You don't want to come in as an NGO and say, oh, you're poor, and give things to people. You want to have an economy that is having these virtuous relationships between dealers and farmers after the NGO leaves. This was a very successful project in Ethiopia with a technology of manual well drilling. And what this did was it took a technology that is extremely common in Bangladesh and that delta with a very high water table, and it transferred it to Ethiopia. So we had a team there sorting through all of the technical issues, working with local artisans, providing training and certifying them, and then getting them up and starting as this manual well drilling business. Another technology IDA developed in Ethiopia was this is what a rope and washer pump looks like. This is the famous treadle pump. IDE disseminated 1.5 million of these in Bangladesh, and 2.5 million total throughout Asia. The founder of this was Paul Polik. He passed a year ago, and his top technical director was Bob Yoder. So Bob was this technical director trying to find all the ways you can do pumping of water on small farms. Another core technology offering of IDE was called multiple use systems. What that refers to is, you know, in development, you have things called silos. And with these silos, you have people who say, we want to develop water for potable water for drinking. And then you have the ag people say, we want to do that for agriculture. So out of this CGIAR irrigation research center, they had a whole, you know, multiple projects participating in how to create systems that, if you see this little thing here, you have your reservoir of water with lines going down to the houses for drinking water and then for the gardens. IMWI, International Water Management Institute, was an IDE, were the ones who implemented this project in multiple countries. So these are my own personal photos of taking a look at these IDE projects. This is in the hillsides of Nepal. And this is a couple using a IDE appropriate technology of the, you know, the plastic cover over the plants, like a little greenhouse. This was they wanted a pretty reservoir, not just any reservoir. So they had this very nice clay or ceramic water reservoir. And the woman on the left is, there's two lines there. I don't know if you can see them, but they're twining a source of water with drip irrigation. So, you know, channeling that water right to the plant roots. And here's a diagram of that in work. It's gravity flow. So you put the container of water up on a pedestal, and then it runs out with, on the drip irrigation, there's just these little tiny tubules that are carefully placed right where the plant is. Again, these are my photos when I did a trip to Cambodia. So two of the farmers that were working with IDE. And now, guess what? We're back. Where is this? Who are these? Yeah, this is in Thailand, I'm pretty sure. Okay. This is in Cambodia. So this woman, this is her back of her yard, which is in a high productivity of horticulture growing. Here we're in Bangladesh. And so just to talk about the model for IDE, at first they were just really content with disseminating these treadle pumps. But then they said, hey, we really should get involved in the whole value chain and getting the high quality inputs to the farmer, but then organizing these farmers in these marketing and production committees. And so this is what this is showing. It's a type of vegetable native to Bangladesh. And here is the joint marketing. There's one day all the farmers do their harvest and bring it to the regional market. More photos of Bangladesh. Then you can apply this modality to any value chain. So this is a pig value chain in Vietnam, and the intervention was introducing introducing feed to the pigs that would fatten them in half the time and increase the productivity by twice. Okay. So I'll just leave you with this slide and then jump off here, but it shows what a value chain is. And we're going to hear a lot about that in times of COVID, because the COVID is interrupting these value chains of having your input market providers giving the seeds, irrigation, fertilizer, the credit. The micro entrepreneurs learn the high production productivity techniques. And then they have farmer producer groups that do this collective storage, processing, and transport of the product. So with that, I will stop share.
Thank you, Laurie. Again, another very informative conversation that relates to the tools that we need to bring peace. You know, there's a lot of value in meditating, but what you're telling us is a lot of action that's being taken around the world with entities and organizations that the everyday person, including myself, have absolutely no knowledge of. And so it's really so valuable that you bring this. And that's why I was so happy that you decided to be with us and bring us 7 days of nuts and bolts about how peace, because really, if people don't have water, they don't have a roof over their head, they don't have, you know, the things that we take for granted, then how are we going to get to a peaceful state on this planet? So the work that you have done and what you're bringing is really vital to, I think, to teaching us awake folk, exactly, you know, giving us more tools and more things to research, investigate, and to.
Well, the one thing that I would like to leave with is
Sure.
There is this community that knows how to program these funds for basic human needs for all of the global issues. They're just starved for funds. So once we can wrest that away from unproductive weapons development, then we can, you know, take off. The sky's the limit. So the people the finance people, the project managers, the technical staff, there's a whole field and cadre of professionals who do this work.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Laurie, for dedicating your life to these issues and bringing them forward for us.